Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Kevin Quinley from the U.S. Census Bureau, coming to you from a socially distant, safe location. Really excited to be here with you this afternoon and talk a little bit about where things are with the 2020 census and let you know how you can get involved with our effort to make sure everyone in the country is counted. I'm going to just give it a minute or two for folks to join on the stream, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, why don't we go ahead and dive in here today, because I have a lot of topics that I'm excited to speak with you about today. So, first off, happy Saturday and Saskrikal Sanguth. I hope I didn't butcher that terribly, but I was talking with some of the organizers before this event and thought that might be a nice way to kick off our conversation together. It is going to be a conversation today, even though this is just me talking to you through the camera, because I've worked with the United Sikhs to develop a set of questions that are responsive to what they're hearing about from the community, what folks are asking them about the 2020 census. So I'm going to just walk through some of the responses and hopefully make sure that you're a little more informed, so that when you're in conversations with your friends, family, and neighbors about the census, that you can tell them what the reality is too. I'll start by just briefly introducing myself. So my name is Kevin Quinley. I am Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Census Bureau within the Communications Department. And so my job has a couple different components to it, but one of them is working with faith-based communities to encourage everyone across a host of traditions, the entire breadth and depth of faith traditions across this country, to make sure that each one of them is counted. So we have folks that do that at the local and regional level, and I'll talk a little bit more about that during this presentation. And then we have a team at the national level that I head up with a few super talented colleagues at the census. So that's where I'm coming from. The United Sikhs have been a really keystone partner for our faith-based partnership portfolio throughout the past year plus of census engagement. And I do want to thank them for this wonderful opportunity to gather and talk about this critically important mission. Really, we're so deeply grateful, not only for providing this platform today, but for your tireless advocacy on behalf of the 2020 census over the past few months. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. I want to begin, and I'll just as a caveat tell you that I do have a few notes that are prepared on my computer screen. And so if I'm looking down from the camera, that's just to kind of get my bearings about where things stand, so we can keep this conversation flowing nicely. But before I dive into that Q&A, I just want to give everyone a baseline on where things stand with the census, because this has truly been a census unlike any other. We do our best to prepare for a host of different scenarios, And I think even in our wildest what ifs, we never envisioned doing the 2020 census in the middle of a pandemic. But I actually feel like the census is going pretty well. And there's a couple reasons for that, but let me first just give you some data to back up what I'm saying. We've actually had over 62% of the country that has already responded to their census. That represents over 91 million households. So, given everything that's been going on, I feel pretty proud of that fact. And it's because of different things that we've done with the census that I feel like have made it easier than ever for people to respond. The biggest change that comes to my mind is the fact that this is the first ever census where anyone in the country can go ahead and fill out their form online. So that link to respond to the census will be open the entire time that we're collecting data. And so we're encouraging everyone to go to 2020census.gov to fill out their form and respond. It's a quick, easy process. I say that as a Census Bureau representative, but that's what I've heard from friends and family that have used that route to fill out their census as well. We also allow folks to respond the traditional way of mailing back in their form. And then we also have an option of call-in response to the census, which is another innovation. This is the first time that you're able to dial the Census Bureau and actually be able to respond over the telephone. So that's an option for folks that want to pursue it as well. So all of those kind of innovations to our operation are a nice way to encourage people to respond even when there is so much going on. People can't leave their houses and are skittish about maybe someone coming to their door. We also have a very robust marketing, communications, and partnership effort that has been powering the census. And so that's the other side of this coin. And I think it's a real testament to groups like the United Sikhs, all of the really faith-based communities that we've been working with, that things have gone so smoothly. It's a testament to the fact that they're out there taking our message, reinforcing it with the communities that they work with on a day-to-day basis, and really hammering home the fact that the census, it's important, it's safe, and it's easy. So that's really our key message, and our partners have just been tremendous in terms of putting it in their own voice and reassuring people that it is important to respond. I'm going to spend today talking a little bit about each of those 3 points through these different questions and answers, and hopefully give you all some insight into why that is and why it's so important, why it's safe to respond, and hopefully give you some ideas that can encourage you to not only respond to the census, but also become what I would call a census ambassador, become someone that is a community advocate for the census, that not only completes the form themselves, but also encourages their friends, families, neighbors, everyone in their kind of community to go ahead and fill out their census as well. So that's what I'm hoping you'll take away from today's presentation. So why don't we just dive right in there? And I want to begin by first explaining why the census is important, why it matters. And so the fundamental reality is that the census is enshrined in the Constitution. The Constitution tells us that every 10 years we have to do a count of everyone living in this country. And so because of that 10-year interval between censuses, there is time. There are many new people to this country. There are folks that have never completed a census before. And all of that goes into this question of what is the census? Why does it matter to me? Well, if people know one thing about the census, in my experience, they know that it's linked to political power in some way. And that's true. The census counts are used for the apportionment of the seats in the House, and they're also used by the states to do redistricting. However, that political element of the census, that only tells part of the story. The reality is that census counts are hugely impactful for the allocating federal resources to communities and neighborhoods like yours. There are studies that show over $500 million in annual federal funding is guided by the census counts. So that means that filling out your census could lead to things like improved roads, nearby hospital, increased education funding, or even funding for emergency services, which is obviously so critical in this time of need. So that message about the community benefits that are related to participating in the census, it's really impactful and something that we found has been a huge motivator to encourage people to respond to their census. In fact, our campaign encouraging response to the census has a tagline that says, "Shape your future, start here." And that really underscores the impact of all of those community benefits that are tied to participating in the census. It's also critical to do a complete and accurate census count so that other stakeholders, that businesses that are deciding where to put new franchises, that they have a full landscape and understanding of where different folks live. So it is so important to participate in the census, both because of that, important piece about political representation, but also about making sure that your community gets its fair share. So we know that the country, there are certain folks that will respond to the census after receiving their first mailer, or the first time that they see an advertisement, they'll go right to our website and fill out the census. However, that's not where our communications team spends most of our time and energy. We at the Census Bureau have done extensive research into understanding some of the response trends for the census and other similar surveys that we conduct over the years. And we've been able to segment the country into what we call hard to count groups. So there are certain signals that are associated with more likely to be undercounted in the census or less likely to respond to any of our surveys. So for a host of reasons, we have groups like young children. We have groups like immigrants. We have people experiencing homelessness. We have non-English speaking households. We have renters. All of those are characteristics that are more associated with being what we call hard to count. And so our effort, our energies are really devoted to making sure that we can encourage response from those people that may not be responding on their own. So how do we do that? There's a couple different ways, and I already alluded to the traditional full-scale advertising campaign that we have to support the census. So we're doing lots of things on Facebook, for instance, but we're also up on broadcasts and traditional media. We're outside, billboards, bus stations, you name it, we're probably running advertisements there. It's not just about the number of advertisements, though. It's also about the fact that we have enlisted subject matter experts that work with some of those hard to count communities to develop outreach materials that are responsive and speak to those individual communities. We have an extensive language support program as well. So you're able to respond to the census online in 12 non-English languages. We also have language guides that are available for 59 languages. And so that represents about 99% of the country in terms of language coverage. We're also running advertisements in those 12 non-English languages that we've identified as reaching a certain population threshold. And beyond that, we have now expanded, just this summer, expanded our advertising campaign to include 45 of the 59 languages that are represented in the totality of the campaign. So that's either maybe some search advertisements or doing some print materials that are available for folks. But we really do have a robust language program to make sure that folks are hearing about the census in their native tongue. The communications effort includes folks working on national partnership, like myself, as well as a constellation, a network of local partnership specialists that are scattered throughout the country. And these are the folks that are forging relationships with local churches, local synagogues, local chambers of commerce, and being able to identify what we call the trusted voices in the community. Those are the folks really like yourselves that will go ahead and take the message of the census, put it in their own words. We know that it's one thing when we're telling people to fill out their form, but it's an entirely different thing when you have a community leader, when you have someone in your faith community that's telling you to fill out the census. That's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to be talking with you all today. This is our 2020 Census Faith Communities Weekend of Action. So we are asking communities of faith across the country to take action in a way that fits with their tradition or house of worship or is consistent with whatever the situation is in their locality. So what do I mean by that? There are a number of ways you can get involved with the census, and we have made extensive resources available on our website. We have the 2020 Census Outreach Materials page, which we will link to in the comments section. And if you go there, you can find materials that are specifically developed for the faith community, including a recently updated Faith Community Weekend of Action guide. And that includes ideas about ways to encourage participation in the count in your community, even in this time of COVID-19. So some of the things that we've seen partners do have been posting about the census on social media sites, as well as letting their followers, their parishioners, their congregants know about the importance of the census through some of the communications they have, maybe putting it in a newsletter or including it, weaving that census message into that message that they're hearing at their religious service that particular weekend. We also have partners that are doing, that are kind of infusing census into some of their direct service work. So folks that are maybe preparing food bags for people in need are including census literature that they've gone ahead and printed out through our 2020 Census Outreach Materials page. So again, this is something I'm really excited about. We're already seeing some great partner activity, both with the national groups that I'm working with, as well as at the local level across the country. And so please consider getting involved in any way that makes sense to you on this 2020 Census Faith Weekend of Action. I want to turn to a topic that I know is of critical importance to this community and many of the other communities that we work with for the census. And that's, I guess, the trust factor. Okay, so we've talked a lot about how to encourage people to respond to the census, but let's dive into some of the reasons why people may be skittish or apprehensive to respond. Let's face it, there is a lot of uncertainty out there, whether it's news about the government or the census or just things that are happening in the private sector. People feel like their information isn't secure. They're uncertain what's going to happen to it. Maybe the census data is going to be sold to the highest bidder. We hear all sorts of things. So I do want to just go on record and start by just reading out what the questions are on the forum. So we ask, how many people are living or staying in your home as of April 1st, 2020? We ask whether the home is owned or rented. We ask your telephone numbers so that we can conduct some quality assurance checks after we've completed the census. We ask their name, sex, age, date of birth, race, and Hispanic origin of each person in the household. And then we ask about the relationship of each person in the household to one central person. So, what's important there is what's not included in that census form. I would say that's as important as what's in it, because if you see a census that's asking for, say, your social security number or your credit card information, that's not the 2020 census. Even the question on, are you a citizen? That's not included with the 2020 census. And if you're seeing something that purports to be the census and includes one of those questions, please flag it, because that may be something that's a scam. That may be something that is illegal, and it's definitely not coming from the U.S. Census Bureau. On that census form, we want people to tell us who they are. And I know one of the ways that this community can do that is by writing in Sikh on your form on that race question. So that's the census form. I also want to talk about what happens to your data after it's been submitted, after we take it in at the census. So census responses are protected by federal law. Under the U.S. Code, Title 13, Census Bureau employees are bound for life to protect the confidentiality and security of each individual response for the census. We cannot release your personal information to anyone. So your census responses are only used in aggregate to produce statistics about the population. This is a really important point. Even if we are asked by law enforcement, if we're asked by DHS, if we're asked by a police department, we cannot share census information with them under penalty of law. All Census Bureau employees are sworn for life to protect that individual privacy and anonymity. It's really something that is sacrosanct at the Bureau, and it's threaded into our DNA. Beyond that, were any of us to violate that Title 13 pledge, we would be subject to jail time or extensive fines. So, again, if there is one message that I would ask you to please take forward to your communities about the census, it's that responding to the census is safe and that your individual responses will never be used against you. I want to touch on one other thing about the security and safety aspect of the census, because we are about to move into a new phase of the campaign. In just a few weeks, we will be sending census takers out across the country to collect data from folks that have not responded on their own. We're already doing that in a few places, but I want people to feel comfortable with the fact that census takers are going to be out in their neighborhoods. We have equipped all of our census takers with personal protective equipment, and they'll all be wearing face masks. I just want to give you all some information about how to identify a census taker in your neighborhood so that you know it's a legitimate U.S. government employee. All Census Bureau employees will have an ID badge that will include their name, their photograph, a Department of Commerce watermark, and an expiration date. So please, if you're ever uncertain about whether someone that purports to be a census taker is actually doing the job that we've instructed them to do, look for that information and contact the Department of Commerce or the Census Bureau if you're concerned about the legitimacy of someone that's doing that door knocking operation. It will begin on August 11th and will continue until October 31st, which is kind of the deadline to respond to the census. However, just because census takers are out in the neighborhood, please don't wait for them to respond. We get better quality data. We want to keep as many people from going door to door in this environment as possible. So even once they're out making the rounds, there's still time to respond on your own. So we please encourage you to do so. The last item that I will talk about is, now that COVID has affected our entire lives, what are some of the ways that folks can safely encourage the count in this environment? And, frankly, I think I've touched on many of these ideas, but we think it's hugely impactful, and we actually on our YouTube site have a playlist of different faith leaders that have recorded PSAs and testimonials reminding their community why the census is important. If you have a faith leader or influential member of your community that you think might be willing to take some of these messages that I've been telling you about, some of the facts about the census, and putting it in their own words, encouraging them to respond, please ask them to record such a video. We have plenty of examples of those on our YouTube page, and then we have at that outreach materials site examples of different messages that you can use that are responsive to this moment. In addition, please consider hosting virtual events like this one. When we're all stuck at home looking for ways to connect with each other safely, getting folks together for just a 10 to 15 minute chat about census is hugely impactful. One of the ways that you all may want to consider engaging with the census is by visiting our 2020 census response map. So we have, I was telling you at the beginning of this talk that we have over 62% of the country that's responded to the census. So I'm pulling that data from a publicly available map that we have available on our website, and that we'll include a link to. And you can actually see all the way down from the state and larger level. We have a county level, but you can take it all the way down to your specific census tract or your neighborhood. And so that's one way that we are encouraging our partners to take the data that we're making available and really allowing them to shape their outreach and say, well, we're seeing that some of our community in this area are responding at a lower rate relative to the other areas. How do we try and do better there? So, that's a great resource that you can use in terms of shaping some of your 2020 census outreach. And again, I'm going to take a second and check to see if we've received any questions that I can address during this presentation. I know we have more information about how to self-respond, especially on that race and ethnicity question on the United Sikhs website. So I would point you there in terms of any questions about how to self-identify on the census, because again, it's a form where we want you to tell us who you are. If you just give me a second, I'll see if there are any additional questions that I can answer. Yeah, so the one question I got was about data sharing and related to immigration status. And again, immigration is not one of the questions. We don't have anything related to that on the actual census form. So you can be assured that however long you've lived in this country, we do want you to respond to the census. And you know, any census, any form from the census that has that information, it's not something from us. So we don't share the information about that topic because it's not on the form, or any other topic because we are prohibited from doing so by law. I got one other question about the last date to respond to the census. And so we have actually extended the window for people to respond to the census because of all of the changes that we've had to make due to the pandemic. So originally we thought by this point that we would be wrapping things up. And while we're now moving into a new phase of the campaign and of our operation, the final deadline to respond to the census is October 31st. Okay, I got a question about international students and whether they should be filling out the census. So international students, they are, if they are studying in this country, they are included with the census count. Okay. So I'm not seeing any other additional questions. I would encourage you, if you do have other items that you want to ask about, please reach out to the United Sikhs, and they have an open line of communication with the Census Bureau. Either they'll be able to address your question because I've worked with this group and I know they know the census and the importance of response and all of the key things that I've been telling you today, but we're also happy to take back anything and get you the response that you need. So with that, I will again thank everyone for their time. And hold on one second, I'm just making sure that I've answered all the questions. Correct. Okay, so we're still getting questions about the data sharing and what happens after you fill out the census form. And I completely understand this is something that we always hear about from different community groups because there's a lot of uncertainty, especially in this day and age, about what's happening. Census is high profile, it's in the news, but the reality is that we are prohibited from sharing your data with any law enforcement agency, and that includes the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So we don't ask about citizenship status on the form, and we don't share data on individual respondents with any other government agency. And so that is sacrosanct for the Census Bureau. It's a message that we need to keep hammering home because it's one of the biggest inhibitors to response there is, for a good reason. But the fact is, the Bureau has a 200-year record of appropriate data stewardship. It's something that we hang our hats on. And frankly, we all take a lifetime oath to uphold. So it's something that is enshrined into law, but it's also just part of our culture. So to the extent that we can assure people that their data will not be used against them, please take that message back from this presentation and reinforce it in your community. So we got a question about how questions end up on the census form. That's a really interesting question. It is something that we really grapple with at Census because we don't want to include a litany of questions and make it overly burdensome for respondents. I worked in research prior to coming over to the census, and survey fatigue, it's a real thing, and it really does impact the response that you get to a questionnaire. So especially for something like the 2020 census that we're distributing to the entire country, we really boiled it down to just the questions that are important for statutory purposes. So we ask questions like race and ethnicity for, among other things, the purpose of being able to uphold some of those anti-discrimination provisions that are enshrined into law. So again, knowing what race you are helps to make sure that voting districts are drawn fairly and in compliance with the Voting Rights Act. Those are the ways that we add questions onto the census form. It's not a process that we take lightly, and it is something that requires congressional approval. So we got a question about how outside groups use the census demographic data. And I think that, again, we don't release individual level information about census response to anyone. So, I've emphasized that we don't do that with other government agencies or people that might use your data against you. But that also extends to folks that may just want to use that as a way to pre-populate certain demographic information about you. We would never share information about you, the individual, with anyone. We do release aggregate level statistics about the population of the country and then at different sub-geographies. And it is critical to make sure that we have an accurate count of those so that whether it's policymakers or people outside of government, business folks are having a good understanding of what the citizenry, what the population looks like in a given area. I say this line, it's kind of corny, but the census is better data for better decisions. And so those statistics are used extensively. We have a robust data user community. And so that's why it's important to tell us who you are on the census form. My colleague was just reminding me that another step in terms of getting a question on the form is securing approval from the Office of Management and Budget. So again, there is another layer to that approval process, which includes the researchers at Census finding a justifiable need for the question, getting it approved by OMB, and as well as submitting the topics to Congress ahead of the census. So it's not a snap your fingers process, nor should it be. Okay. So I think and I hope that we have covered all of the questions that you all have. But again, I appreciate your interest in the 2020 census, and I know that United Sikhs, they are a dear partner to us and can help to funnel any additional queries or concerns that surface from this conversation or otherwise regarding the 2020 census. I'll just leave with a final plug for the Census Faith Communities Weekend of Action. Please, during the course of this weekend, visit 2020census.gov. Check out the hashtag census 2020 census. Excuse me, hashtag 2020 census on Twitter and Facebook and other social media sites to see what different faith organizations are doing to support the census this weekend. We have lots of resources on our website as well. Check out the U.S. Census Bureau's YouTube page for some exciting content there. We have faith leader videos. We did a cartoon partnership with VeggieTales where we produced a song, Everyone Counts. It's pretty cute, and it's a fun way to spend 2.5 minutes this weekend. So please check it out. And again, thank you to United Sikhs. Thank you to everyone listening today. Please respond if you haven't already. And if you have responded, please tell others in your network to go ahead and respond to the census. It's important, it's safe, and it's easy. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your weekend.